Hi, my name is McClure of Metal Ray Radio. My co-host Evan is currently working, so he's not going to be able to conduct this interview. And today we have quite an interview. This man can only be called a pioneer of television. He's worked with MTV, he's worked with Nickelodeon, he's been executive producer for many, many famous TV shows, and the list just goes on and on. But all I can say is, here is Fred Seibert.
Thanks.
Seibert.
Thanks, Zach.
How you doing today, Fred?
I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you on. You're the most famous person I've ever talked to.
Then you're in big trouble, bud.
All right, let's go ahead and start this off. Where did you? How'd you first get into TV production?
I got into TV production by accident because I was in college radio, actually. And while I was in college radio, I taught myself how to, engineer music, which is what I really wanted to do. I had a rock and roll band. And I started by accident making jazz records at my college radio station. And so I started in the back room. I started a indie blues and jazz label at a time where it was a little harder to do it than it is today.
Yeah.
And I started this company. I ran it for about 5 years. We finally, went belly up. I took a day job at a country music radio station making promos. And my mentor at the country music radio station introduced me to a guy who was in some newfangled technology called cable television. And he called me, and it was really newfangled at the time. We're talking like early 1980.
Yeah.
And he offered me a job, and I said, I watch television. I don't want to make it. I have no interest.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, come meet me anyway. And I said, okay, I'll go and meet him. And I got there, and I realized that he was smarter than my boss in radio, who I didn't really like all that much.
Yeah. We all learn
And
that.
my mentor had taught me that you go with the smartest person you can. So I quit my job in radio and started up working at the movie channel making promos. That's how I got in.
All right. Awesome. Is the movie channel still around?
Hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
it's owned by Showtime.
Okay. Um. Well, from what I was reading in your biography, after you got to the movie channel, a little while afterwards, you got a job at MTV. How did that happen?
Well, my boss was the head of programming for our company, and the next channel up that they were going to start was this music thing. So we had the movie channel. We had effectively the kids channel, which was Nickelodeon,
Yeah.
and they were going to start 10 channels in different subjects, and the next one up was music. So they were going to start something called the Music Channel. That happened about a month after I joined. A little memo hit my desk from my boss, laying out this thing that was going to be this music channel. And he told me that I was getting a new boss at the movie channel. And I thought to myself, well, gee, I just quit my job to come to work for you, and now you're going to give me some boss that I've never heard of. So I marched into his office, and I didn't really think much of this music channel. I thought it was a dumb idea, but I didn't want to lose my boss. So I walked in and I said, I really ought to be working on this music channel thing. I know more about music than you do. In fact, I know more about music than anybody here. I actually used to produce records.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and said, oh, you're right. Okay, you can work on the music channel. And I said, great. Should I find somebody to replace me in the movie channel? He goes, no, you have to do both. So all of a sudden, I went from having no job to having two jobs in television. And from that day on, I was the music television guy.
Wow. So, what exactly did you do to kind of create MTV's like modern day image?
Well, I don't know that it's the modern day
Well,
image
well,
because,
the starting image, really.
yeah, right, because it was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But well, the most important thing that happened. So I'm the promo guy, right? So in television, generally the promo guy is the guy who says, watch this Monday, a new 2.5 Men. Charlie Sheen gets a haircut. It's a very special episode. And first of all, I thought to myself, if I have to make stuff like that, I'm going to shoot myself. That sounds like the dumbest job ever. But then I thought to myself, well, I'm really lucky because the MTV that was originally conceived, it wasn't called MTV at the time. Like I said, it was called the Music Channel.
Yeah.
It's not going to have any shows.
Oh.
We're just going to have all of these 3-minute videos. And we're never going to know when any of them are playing. So I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what my job is.
That would have been kind of a hassle on today's stuff, especially with like satellite.
Yeah, well, it was all at that point. It was now it's all TV shows, but at that point it was all like 3-minute music videos. And so when I realized that the model of television promotion had no use to us, so the next thing I had to think about was radio, because that was the closest analog, right? We were basically on a certain level going to be radio with pictures.
Yeah.
So I went in to talk to my boss, and I said, so I assume you don't want jingles, wacky radio jingles, of which Dallas, Texas, by the way, is the home of the best jingle factory in the world.
What's that?
It's called Jam Productions. And I would look them up. They're awesome. And they're great people. A guy named John, I'm forgetting John's last name, owns it. But if you put Jam Productions in your Google, you'll find it. They're great.
Right.
Anyway, he said, no, we're going to be much more like a classic rock station. I said, okay, so what do we do instead of jingles? He said, well, I thought we'd get our logo, whatever that was going to be, and we do animations. I go, okay, well, what should the animations? What are you thinking? And he goes, I think they should look like Star Wars. And I said, well, that's stupid. He said, what do you mean? Star Wars is really cool. And now remember, this is the spring, summer, fall 1980.
Yeah.
I said, oh, Bob, Star Wars is like 3 years ago. It's 1977. I thought we were going to be like ahead of the game. He goes, you're a New Yorker. I'm from Mississippi. You New Yorkers think you're so cool, but in the rest of America, it is 1977. I said, I didn't come to work here to be like old. I came to work here to be new.
Yeah.
I said, well, what do you want to do if you don't want to do Star Wars? I said, I want to do Gumby. Now, Gumby was a clay animated character from the 1950s.
Yeah, and they actually, they play a lot of his stuff in the 90s too, very early morning.
Right. So, but at that point it was hopelessly old fashioned.
Yeah.
And the only reason I picked it out of the hat is it was the most opposite to Star Wars that I could think of. And he said, well, what do you want to do that for? And I said, well, one, it's really different than anything else on television. We got to be different. And two, it's the most out of fashion animation in the world. And so the guys who make it don't have any work. And so they'll be the cheapest. And he thought I was nuts, but luckily he got too busy and he didn't pay any attention. So I said, do you have any idea what the animation should look like or feel like? He goes, well, what I was thinking is you could animate a cow, and the cow could be chewing, grass. And then a big axe could come and cut off his head and it'd be bleeding all over the place. And then the cow would vomit and the logo would come out of its mouth.
Oh, wow.
And I said, oh, you mean what you're saying is I should just do whatever I want to do? He goes, right, just make it cool. I said, okay, I can do that. And for me, I was very excited because I had always wanted, I had a rock band, like I said.
Yeah.
And in a certain way, I was as interested in the record covers and the album covers as I was in the bands. And I was too late I'm not a designer, but I was too late to be involved in cool album covers. They were 10 years before. And I thought, oh, gee, if I can do these animations right, they'll be the album covers of the future. So at least I had a mission.
Yeah.
The next thing we had to do is come up with a logo. And there was this famous album cover designer who I really loved and I wanted to use. But I realized that one, he would be really expensive, and we were a startup. We didn't have a lot of money. And two, he was really famous. And I realized that if he did our logo for us, he would get all the credit and I would get none. And I didn't mind him getting credit, but I didn't want to get none.
Yeah.
And more importantly, my best friend from childhood, I met him when I was 4 and he was 5, was a really brilliant artist and he was a music fanatic. He was the guy who introduced me because he was a year older than me. When we were in middle school, he introduced me to all the cool bands.
Yeah.
And I said, well, Frank will be just the right guy. So I called my friend Frank, who had already done some album covers for me at my record company. And I told him we were starting this channel. And would he do the logo? He goes, well, I have a little design firm now. It's okay if we all work on it. I said, sure, that's great. And so he and his team, over a year of doing different versions, came up with what became the MTV logo.
Wow.
And the next thing we need to do is figure out what these little promos were going to be. If we got the little animations, we don't have any shows to tell people what they're going to be on. And I realized with my team that nobody knew how to look at a TV channel that didn't have shows. And that what we needed to do is teach them how to use MTV. And so we decided that the vocabulary of our promos was going to be teaching people how to use the beast, because nobody knew. And so we wrote a little list of all the things we thought were cool about MTV,
Okay.
and we just decided to make little spots about all of these little things. It's in stereo, because at the time, no television was in stereo. It plays new music. It plays your favorite music. It's the world's first video music channel. So my boss said, well, but we're only going to be in America. And I said, yeah, but I had a mentor and he taught me that you should make the biggest claim you can make. And there's no other video channels in the world, so why don't we just claim the world? Then we'll own the whole world. Isn't that better than owning America?
Yeah.
America's great. It's great that we own America, but I'd rather own the whole world. He goes, okay, go for it. So we wrote this list of things up, and I just found wonderful young creative people. And I said, come up with ways to tell people these stories. And if we tell them enough of these stories, they'll know how to use MTV. And that's how we came up with the whole schmear.
Wow. That is amazing.
It was amazing to do it.
And you help basically define a generation.
Who knew?
And now to define the next generation, I have to ask, what did you do to really change up Nickelodeon's image and make it one of the top channels in the nation?
Well, I started working with Nickelodeon right at around the same time as the movie channel, but I didn't have a lot to do with it because it was boring. It was a bunch of people, it was mainly women who wanted to do good things for children.
Yeah.
And there were a few men who worked there too, but it was primarily driven by these women who wanted to make the world a better place. And they had no money, and none of them knew anything about television, so they bought these really boring shows that were good shows but kind of boring.
What shows? Do you remember any of the shows?
Well, the one I remember most, because it has to do with a rock and roll band, was a cartoon show out of England called Belle and Sebastian.
Oh.
And I don't know if you know that band, but the band was named after the cartoon show.
I've never
And
actually heard of it.
yeah, it's a really good show, but it was boring. You can be good and boring too.
Yeah.
And then they had one really good show. In fact, it was the only show that kids actually watched on Nickelodeon called You Can't Do That on
Of
Television out of
course.
Canada, right? So we we my MTV boss came to me and said, "Look, Nickelodeon's in big trouble. They've been in business for 4 years. They've lost $40 million, which in 2011 terms is like $300 million.
Yeah. Wow.
And if we don't start making some money soon, they're going to shut us down. And so we really need your help. We haven't taken any advertising. It was like PBS, right?
Yeah.
In fact, the people who worked there called it the Green Vegetable Channel. It was good for you.
Wow.
And I said, well, there's one problem. At that point, I had already quit MTV. My partner and I had set up our own company. It was called Fred Allen. And then MTV Networks had hired us back to work with them on whatever they wanted us to work on. And Nickelodeon was the first thing. I said, the problem is I don't like children's television. I don't like the people who work in children's television. And honestly, I'm 31 years old. I don't even know if I like children. He said, well, here's how much I'll pay you. And we looked at our bank account and said, okay, we'll take the job. We're completely broke. So to make a really long story short, what Nickelodeon was doing at the time is they looked like a local TV channel and sounded like a local TV channel, but with all kids programming.
Yeah.
And what they would do is they would tell everyone when the next show was on. And then they would say, boy, watch Nickelodeon. It's so much fun. So I sat down with the people who were running the channel and I said, so what do you think the problem is? And they said, well, it's really simple. We tell people we're fun, but we're not. We just say we are. I said, okay, well, we're pretty good at like having fun. Are you going to really let us do it? And then, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, as I remember back to being a kid, like, one of the things that was the most fun in class was shooting spitballs at each other. Like, would you let us shoot spitballs? They said, look, we just don't want to go out of business. And we really love You Can't Do That on Television. And they do the equivalent of shooting spitballs, with green slime and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
I said, okay, well, look, if you'll really let us do that, we'll hire some people that really know what they're doing. And we're going to stop telling people what time the shows are on. And they said, well, you can't do that. It's television. I said, well, here's the deal. I don't know one child that knows how to tell time. And even if they do know how to tell time, they never look at the clock. Kids don't look at the clock. Kids know when they come home from school what's on. They just all know it.
Yeah.
And your problem at Nickelodeon seems to be not that kids don't really look at it. You're the lowest rated network in America. Out of 30 cable networks, they were number 30. But 44% of all children who have cable, watch Nickelodeon sometime during the week. The problem is they tune out within 30 seconds. They go there, there's nothing that's attractive to them, and they go away.
Yeah.
Because they're yappering about the shows that they've never heard of and telling them what time they're on. This is like stupid. So they said, well, what are you going to do? So my partner and I looked at them and said, look, we're going to be fun. We're going to ban the use of the word fun. You can never say you're fun. We're just going to be fun. And we're going to talk about stuff that kids like instead of your shows. They've never heard of your shows. So telling them that Belle and Sebastian is on at 4:30 is never going to compel them to do anything. But telling them that Nickelodeon is the greatest clubhouse on television for kids is something that they'll believe.
Yeah.
Because the fact is, this is again in 1984, the only time that there's television for kids is for 4 hours on a Saturday morning. In fact, the most popular television show for kids in 1984 were reruns of Starsky and Hutch. A violent cop show happened to be on TV when kids got home from school.
Wow.
So we said, here's what we're going to tell kids. Finally, there's a place that's just for you. And it's on every day. If we tell people that over and over again in fun, different ways, they'll watch.
Yeah.
So we did that. In fact, I have a Vimeo page somewhere with a lot of these old promos.
I'll make sure to take a look at it, and I'll
Okay.
post it
Yeah,
with.
just search my name and search Nickelodeon.
Okay.
And we started doing this in June of 84, and Nickelodeon was number 30. And in January of 85, they were number one.
Wow.
And they've been number one ever since, without one new program, without one change, and without one advertising dollar spent.
So you basically just switched over the focus of the advertising without adding any or subtracting any, except
Yep.
the word fun, and you
Yep.
basically changed this channel from number 30 to number one.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wild. It was another wild ride because believe me, my partner and I had no idea what we were doing. We were making up everything as we went along.
Well, it worked. That's
It
all.
worked like it worked like crazy. In fact, I worked with Nickelodeon as a consultant until 6 weeks ago. That's how well it worked.
So even like up till now, you've still been helping Nickelodeon with their image.
Yeah, and now I make shows for them, and I don't work on their image at all. But yeah, I've been behind the scenes consulting to them on that for years.
Yeah. Speaking of making shows, how did you become the head of Hanna-Barbera?
Oh, that was another accident. Mm,
Seems to be the story of your life.
well, the great thing about accidents is you have to be out in the world and making things happen in order to have accidents, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't sit at home. So I was out in the world. Because of MTV, I'd gotten to know a lot of people in the cable television world. And one of my friends eventually became Ted Turner's president of entertainment. And one day we went out to dinner, and I'm a pretty casual dresser, and he was a pretty fancy dresser. He wore suits and Rolex watches and all
Yeah.
that. And I knew what kind of guy he was. So we went out to dinner one night, and I went to the fanciest restaurant in town. And I was the only one that was there in sneakers, and a open collar shirt. And he was like, "What kind of watch is that you're wearing?" Because I had this little cheap watch on. I said, "Oh, this is my Flintstones watch. It has the Flintstones and Scooby Doo and Yogi Bear and Huckleberry Hound."
Yeah.
And he said, "Why do you have that watch?" I said, "Well, the Universal theme park just opened up down in Florida, and I was there on opening day because Nickelodeon has a pavilion there.
Yeah.
And right next to the pavilion was a Hanna-Barbera pavilion. And those are the cartoons. They were the rock star cartoons when I was growing up. Huckleberry Hound was my favorite cartoon. And they have a really great gift shop, and they had this crappy little watch, and it was my favorite thing. So I bought it and I showed it to him, and he was all humiliated that, I wasn't wearing $1,000 Rolex like he was. So we talked a little bit about Hanna-Barbera and why I liked it and all that type of stuff. And I told him about a deal I had made with Nickelodeon to buy some old Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, I didn't know you knew how to do that." I said, "How hard was it? Like Yogi Bear. Okay, we'll do it. So 18 months later, he calls me up and he goes, "Ted just bought the Hanna-Barbera studio." I said, I know. I read the paper. Congratulations. He said, "Well, you told me you're kind of unhappy at your agency." I said, "Yeah, I'm really unhappy, but I don't know what to do." I own this advertising agency with my
Yeah.
partner. And he said, "Well, Hanna-Barbera is a wreck. It's a complete train wreck. Nobody knows what they're doing there. They're losing millions of dollars a year. And I want to close it because we just bought it for the library of cartoons, but Ted won't let me close it." I said, "Gee, that's too bad. Good luck." He said, "Why don't you come and run it?" And I looked at my Hanna-Barbera watch. It was 10:35 in the morning. And I said, I don't know anything about cartoons. He goes, you know more than I do. At least you like them. And I said, uh-huh. And he said, come on, how bad could it be? And I said, well, I'd have to close my company. I can be there in 90 days. He said, okay. And that was that.
Wow.
Now, that sounds really cool, but the secret was that Hanna-Barbera had not had a hit since 1983 with the Smurfs.
Yeah.
They were dead in the water. So here I was, I got this really cool job at this really cool place, but number one, I knew nothing about making cartoons. And number two, the studio obviously didn't either. They hadn't had a hit in 10 years.
Yeah.
So, the good news is I'm working in cartoons. The bad news is I'm working in cartoons.
Well, of course, you have the golden touch, so basically took that company and ran with it, I'm guessing.
Well, again, I don't know how to do all that much other than recognize talented people.
Yeah.
And what I realized that the cartoon business had started ignoring talented people.
Well, yeah.
Management and networks had decided everything for everybody.
Yeah.
And, there's nothing worse than management and networks deciding everything. So I asked around, and the main people I asked were Hanna and Barbera, who were still alive. They still came to work every day. And at the time, they were 82 years old.
Wow.
And I said, look, I love all your stuff, and you guys are great. But tell me, I don't want to know how you made the Hanna-Barbera cartoons. Were Tom and Jerry cartoons made? Because they were also the guys that did Tom and Jerry in the 1940s.
Yeah.
And they basically told me that the way they made their cartoons is they came up with ideas, and their boss knew nothing about cartoons. And if the boss thought that their idea was okay, he let them try one. And if it worked, they would make another one. Now, clearly, in the case of Tom and Jerry, they made another one for 20 years running. They made hundreds of them.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, well, I know how to do that. I know how to tell whether something's good or bad. I know nothing about cartoons. And I did something that Hanna-Barbera had never done, which is I put the word out to the world that Hanna-Barbera was interested in talented people. Because up until then, Hanna and Barbera decided everything. And all these young people who wanted to make cartoons were ignored by the studio.
Yeah.
So I just put the word out literally around the world that anyone with an idea could show up and I'd listen, or my team would listen. And 5,000 people later, we found 50 short cartoons we wanted to do. We made them all. And a bunch of them turned out to be big hits like Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, Cow and Chicken, Johnny Bravo.
Yeah.
It wasn't me, it was them. Those really talented people took me at my word when I said I would listen and
Yeah,
that our studio would listen.
and that's where shows like What a Cartoon and Oh Yeah Cartoon came from.
Exactly right. And to this day, what I do is I just tell people, if you have an idea, I'm open.
Wow. And of course, there's a lot of big people that actually got their start during that. I think Seth MacFarlane was one of the major ones.
He did. He was in our What a Cartoon show. He did one of his few prequels to Family Guy called Larry and Steve for us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Well, seems like it. He's got, what, like 3 major shows on TV right now?
And he just announced yesterday he's rebooting the Flintstones.
Yeah, Flintstones. Yeah, I've heard.
Yep.
I just heard about that.
Yep. We're very excited about that.
Yeah. So, how did you go from basically running Hanna-Barbera to starting up your own studio, Frederator?
Well, running Hanna-Barbera, I was working for Ted Turner. And, Ted was an awesome, crazy genius. And in addition to being an awesome, crazy genius, he was an awesome entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And working for an entrepreneur is really special. I mean, basically, Ted's word to me was, look, do your job, do it the best you can, make your budget, and I'll leave you alone. So, and he lived by his word. As long as I was, responsible with the budget, I could try all sorts of things. What a cartoon, the way we did those short cartoons was not the way anyone else in Hollywood was making cartoons. To this day, it's not the way people make cartoons.
Yeah.
And he stayed out of my way as long as I made budget and I, kept the business running. I had some great help. I had a great partner there, a guy named Jed Simmons, who really like handled the business. I set up these programs to find creative people, and Ted was awesome. The problem was about 4 years in, he sold the company to Time Warner. And all of a sudden, I was going to go from working for a nutty but smart entrepreneur to a relatively faceless corporation. And I'd already really had my fill with the corporations.
Yeah.
So basically, the guy who ran Nickelodeon at the time was a friend of mine from childhood. I had actually brought him into the business. I'd known him since he was 12 years old. I got him his first job, his second job. He ended up becoming president of Nickelodeon. And when he heard that Ted was selling the company, he called me up. He said, "Any chance you could come back?" And I said, "As long as you let me make cartoons, I can come back. I don't want to just be your consultant." He said, "We can figure that out." And, lo and behold, he let me set up Frederator as an independent producer that for a period of time had an exclusive relationship with Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
I was able to not only make my cartoons, but I was able to continue consulting with him on his image and on his marketing and on his programming. And we were both really happy. And so Frederator set up. We opened our doors in 1997. We had our first cartoons in 1998, and we've been rolling ever since.
Yeah, and you got some pretty major hits there too.
Sure thing, but we essentially did the same thing, which is we trusted the talent of the people who really desperately wanted to make cartoons. And we talked to hundreds and hundreds of them, and we would pick what we thought were the best people, not just the best cartoons, but the best people. And, we launched everything from, My Life as a Teenage Robot and Chalk Zone to Oh Yeah Cartoons. And finally, The Fairly Odd Parents,
Yeah.
Adventure Time, and Fanboy.
Which those last three are probably some of the biggest shows on TV right now.
They are. Fairly Odd Parents just celebrated its 10th anniversary.
Yeah.
Um, Fanboy just launched its second season. And we're just finishing up the third season of Adventure Time.
Yeah. Okay, so taking a step back for a second,
Sure.
how did what made you decide to expand your stuff not only to TV but also the internet?
Fear.
Huh.
One of the things that's really true about any business, but it's certainly true about the television business, is eventually you wear out your welcome. And either you get tired or they get tired of you.
Yeah.
And so about 10 years ago, I started anticipating them getting tired of me. And I said, boy, I better find something else to do and another market to move into. So there weren't a lot of choices. One is I could start working in the international market, but I don't really like to travel.
Yeah.
And I could look into movies, but I was scared of movies. One is I'd never made any, and two is I didn't know anybody in the movie business. And three, I could start the internet had started popping up. We were among the earliest professionals in the business to really embrace the internet whole hog. I had been running MTV and Nickelodeon's internet business in the late 90s.
Yeah.
So I'd gotten my taste, but I still didn't know what I was doing. And when we launched My Life as a Teenage Robot, I asked one of my partners who had been a young internet engineer at AOL. He'd been the guy who wrote the code, for instance, for the buddy list on Instant Messenger.
Wow.
I said, is there something I can do on the internet where I don't need to be an engineer and I don't really need a lot of money. Like all the ideas you have are, they cost a lot of money and they take real lot of skills. And he said, yeah, you ought to start a blog. And I said, you mean that thing where teenage girls write their diaries under pseudonyms, that thing? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, well, why should I do that? He goes, you'll learn something. What will I learn? He goes, I don't know, something. Just do it. So sometime 2003, 2004, we started our first blog. It was called the Teenage Row Blog. And sure enough, 2.5 months later, I had learned something, which is without doing anything, I had 2,000 readers.
Wow.
And I realized I owned my own magazine. And within a couple of years, we had launched 100 blogs. Um, I had a young guy who had been my intern. He was 19 years old, and he built us the first multi-user blog platform before WordPress was doing things like that.
Yeah.
By the way, fast forward, that guy is also the inventor of Tumblr and the founder of Tumblr.
Wow.
Um, and we had been lucky enough to have him as an intern. So we had all these blogs, like every short we made at that point for, well, it became Random Cartoons. For Random Cartoons, we did its own blog, plus all sorts of other things.
Yeah.
And we had started embedding video, somewhere in 2005. And I realized that we had a chance maybe to start something in video. So I called David Karp, the eventual Tumblr founder.
Yeah.
And I said, can you build me something like this in video? And I showed him what I wanted. And he said, you really don't want to do that. Very old fashioned idea, very old school, very 2000. There's only, I don't know how old you are, but he was 19 at the time.
Is that
2000 was when he was 14. I could understand. For me, that was 5 years was like a nanosecond. And for him, it was like a third of his lifetime.
yeah. Let's see. 2000, I was 10.
There you go. So very old school. And I said, what should I do? He says, well, you should do a video podcast.
Hmm.
And I said, well, why would I do that? He said, well, within a year, there'll be a video iPod. I said, really? He said, yeah, that's what everybody's going to be doing. I said, David, I have no idea what you're talking about. But, if it doesn't cost me more than $5,000, just do whatever you feel like. So he came up with and edited and wrote and produced the first episode of Channel Frederator.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm in the internet doing television production in the internet. Simultaneously, we started a little movie label and bought the rights to Samurai Jack from Cartoon Network to
Yeah.
start developing it as a feature. And both of them, both the movie business and the internet business, were really just a hedge in case our television business started slowing down. I had no expectations that either of them would be successful, but in the same way that we've kind of done everything, I just figure if you do it sincerely and you work hard enough, something will work.
Yeah.
And that's how we got in.
This is
By the
actually.
way, another nice coincidence, we launched Channel Frederator the same week that Apple suddenly, a year ahead of schedule, launched the video iPod.
Wow.
And
That's.
all of a sudden, we were among the only people with good quality content on iTunes,
Wow.
which is where we got our first user base.
So the line just kind of met right in the exact right spot.
Yeah, that was really being like, lucky, lucky, lucky.
Wow. I was actually going to ask this question later, but since you just brought it up, I'll ask it now. Is there any updates to the Samurai Jack movie?
The update is that the movie business can sometimes take forever and that we are still in development. I do not report that happily or sadly. It just is reality.
Yeah.
And I have no idea when we're going to get the movie done, but I know we're going to get it done.
All right. Well, that's good. You don't want to like a Duke Nukem Forever situation.
Hopefully, it will be out before you have your own children.
Well, that's what I hope. Well, there are a lot of people out there who don't really kind of understand like the process in making a TV show, and when they see like a credits list, they'll just see a list of names and not really know what they do. So, could you kind of tell us what like a producer or an executive producer does for the production process?
um, yeah, I would say that the easiest thing to do, the easiest way to describe it, is we find the people who want to make cartoons.
Yeah.
Um, we find the people who want to pay for cartoons, and we find the people who want to show cartoons.
Yeah.
That's essentially what I do.
So basically, you're kind of just like the backbone. You put everything together
Yeah.
and let them.
Now, there are a million details in the process
Yeah.
of um, making a production, but it starts at the head, and those are the three critical things. You got to find somebody who wants to make them who are good.
Yeah.
You got to find somebody who wants to pay for them who checks were clear,
Of course.
and you want to find somebody who wants to show them who can make you your money back.
Yeah.
I'm here for some reason. My Skype is spamming while we're talking.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But let's see. What was the next question? Oh, so you started making these cartoons in, or you started like helping produce these cartoons in. Let's see. You started working for Hanna-Barbera in
92.
'92.
Yep.
So what do you think of the evolution of cartoons from '92 till about like nowadays?
Well, you know what I found out in my long, long career of television
Yeah.
is that if you like something, it's a great time, and if you don't like something, it's a horrible time. So, like, I found, like, when I got to Hanna-Barbera, I hated cartoons, and the only cartoons I liked were the ones I liked growing up. But I found out that when 25-year-olds came in, they would say to me, "How come they don't make cartoons the way they used to?" And I kept thinking they were talking about the really old cartoons, and they were talking about like Transformers,
Yeah.
which I thought was the biggest junk in the world, or Scooby Doo, which I never liked. I never liked Scooby Doo because I'll tell you why. I was 18 when Scooby Doo came out.
Yeah.
I was chasing girls and listening to the Beatles. So, what I think is, I think that the 90s was an incredible period of renaissance for cartoons. I think the business was completely reinvented
Yeah.
after a 20-year dry spell. I think it's gotten kind of boring again. I think there are a few lights in the tunnel. I would immodestly call Adventure Time one of those lights.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, in 2000, as you said, we're kind of had another dry spell from like 2000 2010.
Hmm.
But then
Yeah,
now we have Adventure Time, which a lot of people are considering to be like the starting point of like a new renaissance.
yeah, I kind of feel that way, but I don't like to like say it too loudly, right?
Yeah.
I also would remind us all that between 2000 and 2010, SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents,
Oh
and
yeah.
and I think that SpongeBob in particular is the Bugs Bunny of our generation. You know, I think it's an amazing cartoon, and the only reason I don't like it is because it's not mine. But you know, it's pretty amazing. I think the Fairly Odd Parents is pretty magical.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it might have been dry, but it wasn't, you know, we weren't dying.
You weren't the Sahara Desert.
Right. But I think that the thing that has really sparked the new renaissance, I love Penn Ward. You know, I think that Thurup, Van Orman with Flapjack was great. The Chowder guys are
Yeah.
great. You know, blah, 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 blah. I really think the internet is what has reinvigorated the creative community in a way that nothing else could, because now the only thing that's stopping a creative filmmaker from an audience is him or her.
Yeah.
The truth is, you no longer need to go to the management. You no longer need to go to the network. You no longer need to go anybody except directly to people.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of great things that are going on there. There are a lot of more great things that are going to come out from now. We're actually planning, we did two original internet series productions in 2008. And we've been off the bus for a couple of years just because, financial reasons. And we're about to start relaunching original series on the internet. And I haven't been this jazzed in 5 or 6 years. It's awesome
Yeah.
because now I don't have to fight with anybody except for myself.
Wow. Uh, I'm basically speechless right now hearing all this stuff.
You shouldn't be speechless, man. You're in the middle of it. I'm at the end of my work life.
Yeah.
You're at the beginning.
Yeah.
We are barely 1/16 of an inch along a 100-foot ruler as to what's going on.
Yeah.
And the world is still being invented and reinvented literally as we speak by people who are much smarter than us. And what we're lucky enough to do is get to take advantage of it. So you and your peers are in the catbird seat. It's an amazing, magical time. And I wish I just didn't have a few more years to be part of it.
Well, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you, Zach.